Dixon, and I am talking to James William Stites, Bill Stites, as we all know him here in Alva. He's lived in Alva for a long time. In fact, he was born here in 1897. His father was John D. Stites from Indiana, and his mother was Anna V. Stites of Missouri. He's been active in a lot of organizations here in Alva, and he's been behind a lot of projects that have come up here in Alva. He's a member of the Masonic Lodge, Modern Woodmen of America Lodge, the Kiwanis Club, the Alva City Council, belongs to the Presbyterian Church. He's one of the trustees of the Charles Morton Trust Fund, and he was in the First World War and also attended Northwestern State College. Some of the projects that he's promoted have been soft water for Alva, the Alva City Library, the Share Medical Center, the Barham Industries in Alva, the Ranger Instrument Company, scientific research, the Hotel Bell, the Veterinary Hospital, Alva Municipal Swimming Pool, Woods County Fair, the Alva Golf Club, the Terminal Elevator, and the school tennis courts. So he's been a very active man here in town. Mr. Stites, would you like to tell us a little bit about your life here in Alva?
Well, it's been quite a pleasant life. Of course, I've had to work all my life, and that's been a pleasure too, because if you can't do a useful work, you just don't amount to much, and you don't help your fellow beings any. I've had a host of friends, and I'll always be thankful to those friends and the teachers and all that taught me what I know. Of course, in the early days, conditions were real hard here, and our modern day people don't have any conception of what hardship means at all. My mother came to this country with her folks when she was about 18, and they came from Missouri and came by oxen team and covered wagon. And mother and her sister drove the cattle, and she walked just almost all the way from Missouri to Alva, driving those what few cows they had. So she told many interesting things. When I was a real small child, we lived in a dugout west of town, and in those days there wasn't any coal, used wood, you know, and I've heard Mother tell many times my father had gone down to the bike jacks to get wood, and a blizzard came up, and of course there wasn't any way to get to town, so Mother and I lived on, she had a little flour and some onions, so we lived on onion soup until my father got back from getting wood, and that's one of the interesting things that of course I was too small to remember, but tell me about. Of course, I was here when many of the changes came, when the Santa Fe brought their new tracks in, and most people don't know it, but up until that time we didn't have any Mexican sandburrs. In the old days, we just had the ordinary sandburrs, but when the Mexicans came in with that track laying crew, that's when the Mexican sandburrs came to Alva, and now we've got, of course, a lot of them. And one of my early recollections is seeing the Rock Island railroad track being built coming into Alva, and they had a deadline to meet, so everybody was there in a crowd to see them, and they had, of course, the ties on the front of the engine, and they'd carry the rails, and the engine was falling right along in order to get into Alva to meet that deadline. That's, of course, also been a long time ago. The interesting thing, of course, that you remember, some of them are funny and some are not. Northwestern was quite an interesting thing to me. I didn't get to go long enough to graduate because I had to go to work, but I did have the pleasure of going there for some years. Back in those days, we didn't have any high school. And you see, you go to grade school and then go to the normal, as we called it, and they picked up the junior high, and until we had a high school now, but that's the way we got our education. And so many of those people had a very important bearing on this locality. The old castle on the hill, as we called it, was almost worshipped by the people. They had a reverence for it that I don't think our students have anymore. And it just meant something. We had to work, and many kids would come in with a buggy or ride a horse, and they'd bring enough food to last them a week, and then on the weekends they'd go home. And that's the way that we got along. We didn't have any dormitories in those days. Lived in private homes and things of that sort. And some of them weren't very handy or very nice, but they were livable. Of course, the professors we had were very high caliber. Maud Drake Bingham had a very pronounced effect. She'd been one of the very fine teachers in debating systems and all of that kind of thing. And incidentally, her debating teams, I believe, held a championship of 3 states along about 1916, 17. And she was a very good influence and taught a lot of people to talk what they know, and she had a good moral influence. We had 2 debating societies in those days, NSC and the PDC. They were quite rivals, you know, as they would be, and Maud Drake Bingham taught them. Frank Wyatt was influential. He was a history teacher, and I don't suppose he had the degrees back of his name, but he had a knack of making you remember, and he'd repeat maybe over and over. One date I remember, 54, 40, or fight. Well, you see, those type of things he made you remember. And he was very upright fellow, and he taught his kids, you know, to work hard and in all of its athletic games to fight as hard as they could. He used to say that a team that wouldn't be beaten couldn't be beaten. Well, sometimes, you know, you would get beat anyhow at the best. But anyhow, he had the spirit. We had one teacher, we called her Reed Loving Watt, and she was a good teacher, and people, you know, kind of enjoyed her, but that's a nickname. Mrs. Shockley was Dean of Women for many years. She had a profound effect on all of our student activities, and Professor Hughes, I remember, was not long out of college, and we didn't have too many football players in those days, so I remember one game they suited Professor Hughes up, and he played with our college team up here, and he got along fine. He made a touchdown or two until some kid at the half told him, you know, said, "Prof, you're just doing fine," and so they put him out from then on. He didn't, but you don't see too much of that. But in those days, we didn't have many players, and nobody was gambling on it, or it didn't mean anything that way, you know. I hear people talk about the credibility gap, you know, between the professors, teachers, and students. Of course, we didn't have any credibility gap in those days, but we had some things. Now, we never could understand quite why one of the professors got upset one time when they tied a cow to his desk, and when he came down the next morning, things were in pretty much of a mess, as you can imagine, but we couldn't understand why he'd get mad. The poor janitor, the fellow that had all the cleaning up to do. And so you remember those things. Carl Schaefer's father, Anton Schaefer, had a horse up on top of his 2-story building where he had a harness shop. Well, it seemed like that horse took wings one night and got up on top of the big smokestack at the college, and so the college didn't like that very well either. They had to get it down some way, and it was harder to take down, I guess, than it was to put up. But you remember some of those things. But in the main, people were very, very earnest in trying to get an education. And it's been quite a good experience for more than 50 years. We at our store have hired boys to work part-time and go to college. Those men are scattered all over the United States, putting her all over the world, and they're in high places, a lot of them. They learn to do things as they study, and I think that is the best education that you can get. And we can look back to those young men that have worked with us, and it's been a very, very pleasant experience. Daddy Herod, as we called him, was a very fine teacher at the college, and I remember Dr. Carter, who helped with the museum, in fact, built most of it. And A.G. Vinson was another teacher that we all liked so much, and I remember him quite well. I don't know whether the modern teacher has the dedication that the old-time teacher did. I know it's harder for them to have that dedication, but it was so hard to get an education in the early day. I think maybe it was looked up to more. I have the feeling that because of that, we have maybe gone a little to the other extreme with education now. I think maybe we wanted our children to have the very best education they could, and we didn't want them to work maybe as hard as we had to work, but I don't think that's been good for the children. I just think it would be better if children had any chores or anything that they had to be responsible for, and work as they go to school, and they'll get a lot more out of it, I'm sure. I had the pleasure of being on the city council for a couple of terms, and had a share in a good many of the things that we'd done at that time. Some of the projects that we have worked on have been getting better water for Alva. In the early day, the first water we had a well over here in the city square, and then we went across the river and got water there, and at the old city farm, as we called it. That's where the Alva Golf and Country Club is at the present time. That's where we first got our water. Then there wasn't enough there, and we went on further northwest up to the Grimes farm and got more water there. But our water was never very soft. It was good quality, but it was awfully hard. It tested about 65 grains or so. So we kept after it, and after 2 years of investigation, we found about the only good water that we could get was down on Cimarron River. So we had a pretty hard struggle, but managed to carry a bond issue, and we did go to the Cimarron River and brought in good water for Alva. And some of the other communities use it. Capron does, and some of the others. Later, we had to run a second line because we got where we used more, than the one could supply. The city has, in the last year or two, extended their water fields, and while we had a scarcity for a year or two, I believe that they have it under control now, where we have a sufficient water supply to take care of things. It's been my pleasure to work with the Charles Morton Share Trust since it was formed after Charles Morton Share died about 11 years or so ago. And we've been able to build a city library and the Share Medical Center, which is one of the very finest in the country. They have as good a building and equipment as there is any place in the state, and they have some things there that isn't in use in the cities even. We do, of course, need some doctors, specialists particularly, and if they could get some of those sort of people, we'd have a very, very fine medical center here. Our doctors we have are wonderful, and they're dedicated, but they work pretty hard, and they do what they can, but there's only so many hours in the day, I had some little to do with helping Doug Barham get his Barham industry started. He's making furniture now, and it looks like it's going to be a very fine success. The Ranger Instrument Company was formed about 2 years ago, and they have come up with some real good developments and patents that they hold, and the Scientific Instrument Company also. So they're going along very well. Of course, in the older days, we promoted and built the Hotel Bell, which served for many years. And of course, motels put the hotel out of business now, but of course, it'll be always a good building and can be used. We recently have been able to work out a veterinary hospital, a new one, which is being built at the present time. And we think this will be of big help to the farmers with cattle. Of course, back in the old days, we promoted and built a swimming pool here, which was, at that time, the largest in the state. It's been a real good recreational thing, and I've had the pleasure of helping with the Woods County Fair. And when we first started the golf course, I, of course, helped do that. It's since been moved. The terminal elevator was one of the largest things that we did, and it has served well. The farmers cooperative on it now. Originally, it was owned by the local people, but it was just too big, too hard to handle, and so it was finally sold. And the farmers cooperative now have a good many elevators in this area, and they use the terminal for central storage. And it's made where they can take, I believe they have storage space enough for about 2 years crop in Woods County. So we're never going to lack for storage. We had the pleasure of building tennis courts for the various schools in town, and I think they're used not only for tennis, but they're used for all types of children's play when the weather is bad. Reminiscing back to the real early day, my father worked on the college, the old castle on the hill when it was built, and that goes back, of course, a long way. It was fashioned after French castle, as most people know, and of course we just felt like we'd lost one of the family when it burned down, you know, and they came back and built a more modern building, but it doesn't have the thing that we treasured in the old castle on the hill. Of course, we have a lot of buildings up there now, and we do have, I think, one of the finest colleges in the country. They have been particularly strong in the sciences and all of that department, and a great many of our graduates have gone to the OU School of Medicine. I believe that, I think there were about a third of the graduates last year from the OU School of Medicine came from Northwestern, and it's rather unusual, but we've had Dr. Carter, of course, started, and Miss Fisher was, of course, in the department, and they've had real good teachers. Joe Melton has been another one, and so we have Professor Lisk, who many people will remember. Originally was in the grade schools here for many years, principal, and then he went on to the college, and he's one of the old teachers that we remember with affection. I remember Miss Ernest was a teacher that I had in the grade school that I always remember. And the teachers can make or break the student, really, because I think all of us have someone that we look up to as an ideal. And so if it may be a teacher, maybe somebody else, but we have the ideal that we kind of pattern ourselves after. I had the pleasure of working for Noel R. Gashaw, who built the original light plant in Alva. Alva Light Power Company was called. I started working there when I was around 12 or so, and later was cashier for the company. And he was kind enough, and others after him, to let me work after noons. So I went to college half a day and worked from 12 or 1 on until whenever it got done, and that might be midnight, but it didn't make any difference. You had your work to do, you know. And the colleges can help that way if they could get their classes as much as they can, where people can work part-time. We have some young people working for us now, and I know a lot of folks think young people aren't any good anymore, but I don't agree. We have as fine a crew. We have 4 now working, and they're as fine a bunch of boys as we've ever had in 50 years. And I think 1 or 2 of them are the sharpest that we've ever had. And so these young people, most of them are all right. There's some that are not, but in the old days we had some that were not just what they might be too, you know. And of course we were lucky to have some outstanding athletes here, which Bonnie Stewart happened to be one. Dick Smith was another one, who were nationally known as basketball players. And we, of course, had the champion wrestler of the world came from Alva at one time. So we, I don't remember. I can't remember either, but he was a good one. And I think he lives in Colorado now, but he was extremely good. We used to have, yes, Roy Dunn, that's right. Ward Chase was here at one time. He was a teacher, and he taught athletics some. And they have a reunion, I think, yet for Ward Chase every year or so. So he had a profound effect, and we need to keep those things going, those traditions that we have. I don't know how you get away from the mercenary end. It seems like we do have more of the mercenary end anymore, and we don't have hardly enough of the worthwhile things that you can't measure in money. We've always been blessed here with good churches and good surroundings to live. This happens to be one of the healthiest places in the United States. We don't have any malaria or anything of that sort, you know. And we have so much to be thankful for. One of our boys that worked for us, Baxter, Sauce Baxter, got to be quite high in the Western Electric Company. And when they made the transistor, they sent him to England, and he supervised putting the first transatlantic cable together with transistors in it, and it was laid across the ocean.
That was Silas Baxter?
Silas Baxter, yes. Yes, he was in charge. He was in England, England and Spain is where they did it. He was there about 18 months while they put that cable together and laid it across the Atlantic. And that's the first time, you know, that they had a direct voice. You see, they couldn't amplify it enough to get it across the ocean. And Jimmy Lisk was another one that worked for us, and he happened to be back on a visit now. He lives in California, and he worked as a radio serviceman, and just literally hundreds of them, you know, that the thing I'd like to stress about the whole thing is that if you try to live the right kind of a life and help your people around you, it's fine in a moral sense. It's the only way to live. But there's another curious thing about it. It has its rewards in a monetary way, too. Because if you help somebody across a hard place, he's then going to help you when you are in need. So it's a mutual thing, you know, and if we could just have that in all of our living, we wouldn't have some of the problems that we have nowadays. And that's the one philosophy. Noel Argashaw, of course, was that way, and that's where I got a good deal of my philosophy, and I'll always be thankful to Noel Argashaw. He built a light plant, as I said a while ago, and I worked for him for many years. but you can't live for self alone, you know.
That's right.
We had some good tennis teams here in the past. I used to team together with Bill McGill, and we went to many tournaments and did very well, you know. And of course, I had the pleasure of playing on the basketball team at the college for a number of years, and got to play with some of the old timers. Bonnie Stewart was one of them that was All-American, and Pete McClure, who's dead now, and Roscoe Daughter, and some of those boys. Tommy Lane was another one, and we can look back. In those days, we didn't have the courts like we had nowadays. You had just little courts, and they were maybe upstairs, and the walls were part of the edge of the court, and you'd bang your heads into them. I remember down at Ada one night, they were that way, and they got behind me and put me in between two seats and broke my nose, and so I always remember that. And of course, now we have fine gymnasiums and surroundings to play, which we didn't have back in those days. But we have some conditions now that are rather disturbing. People don't have the patriotism, I don't think, that we had. We had some very, very fine people in the old days, and they would not have stood a minute for some of the things that we have nowadays. Our thinking was different, and so that's the thing that we must remember. If you can't uphold your country and what's right, will fall eventually.
Do you have children, Mr. Stites?
Yes, we have two daughters, Joyce and Billy Ann. We didn't have any sons, but we're very proud of the girls. They're nice girls, and they play the piano and play the organ and things of that sort.
Do they live here now?
Yes, they both live here now. Bill Johnson, Billy Ann's husband, is in the store with me, and Joyce Garrett, her name is now. Her first husband was R.M. Beeler, and he died some years ago. And Joyce remarried, and she did run Joyce's Cafe. Now, you'll be familiar with that, which she just sold recently. And so we just are proud of the girls, really are.
Any grandchildren?
Yes, we have a good many. I couldn't tell you just offhand, but we do have several. Yes, we have several grandchildren. And we have some great-grandchildren.
Well, good.
When you get great-grandchildren, then you know you're the elder generation. So we have some great-grandchildren. See, I'm getting up to the age now where, you know,
it counts.
That's right.
Well, I certainly have enjoyed talking to you, Mr. Stites, and I hope you'll be with us again before long and give us some more information about the early days.
Be happy to.
Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.